You know what? I don't like your tone. Luckily, there's a video to help you with that, hopefully. Tone is one of the most often overlooked elements of storytelling, and that's a real shame because it's also one of the most important. Fail to nail your tone and you will fail to engage readers. Your writing will seem a little off, flat. If a reader ever says something like a book didn't seem to be for them, in spite of them being interested in the plot or characters, or they didn't like the direction the story went shortly into the story, then that's usually a problem with tone. All the work you do on plot and characters and setting is all for naught if you don't get the tone right. So let's talk about what tone actually is and isn't, what its purpose is in the story, and how to make sure you get it right. This is one of the more difficult topics I've covered, not because tone itself is an especially complicated subject or difficult to define, but rather because it is linked to a bunch of related elements of storytelling that interact and contribute to one another in different ways. It's a bit like Oedipus's family tree. There's a bunch of related stuff that also works together to create a bunch of the stuff that's related. Anyway, tone is a distinct concept from the closely related concepts of theme, mood, atmosphere, and voice. All of these things contribute to each other and work together to build out different elements of the story, but they each serve a distinct purpose. Theme is the underlying message or driver of motivations within the story. It's the answer to the question, what is this book about, when you strip away anything about the plot or the characters. I did an entire video on it if you want to check that out. Mood and atmosphere often get lumped together with tone, but they are, in my opinion at least, distinct from tone. Mood is the emotional state of the story, either of the characters in it or the reader as they read it. All the other elements that I'm talking about will work to shape the mood. Your tone and voice contribute to the mood, as does the setting and the events in the plot. I like to think of mood as kind of the end point of all these elements. When you weave together voice, tone, and a little bit of theme, along with the broader context provided by the setting and the characters, you end up with the overall mood of the story. Voice, which can be further divided into the author's voice and the character voice, is also separate from tone, but very closely related to it. The main purpose of voice is to create distinction. Character voice is how we allow the reader to differentiate between characters. Every viewpoint should be distinct. The way the character describes and interacts with the world around them and the way they speak through dialogue allows us to pick that character out of a crowd, while also melding nicely with their motivations and backstory. Authorial voice is the same concept, but at the author level. It's how your writing can be distinguished from other people's writing. This applies both at the prose level in your own individual style. This applies both at the prose level in your own individual style, but also at a broader plot and character level. Voice is closely related to tone, but it's usually talked about in a different context, so I'm going to talk about it in a different context. Which brings us to tone, which is good because it's the topic of the video. Tone is the attitude in which a piece is written. It is how the author is approaching the subject matter of the story. Tone arises out of what is emphasized, how things are paced, how settings are described. All of these things work together to convey tone. It's distinct from mood in that tone is not necessarily an emotional state, where I would argue mood is an emotional state. The tone can be humorous or serious, optimistic or pessimistic, nostalgic or subversive. There's all kinds of different tones out there. Tone is something that gets layered on top of character voice, or maybe underneath it. There is generally only one tone throughout a story. Having more than one or switching between different tones, as we'll talk about later, can actually be a problem. This is where I think mood really becomes distinct from tone, because you can have, and arguably should have, multiple moods within a story as the tension increases and eases as the character moves through different settings, but the underlying tone of the story needs to remain consistent. That's because the main purpose of tone is to tell the reader how the author plans to handle the subject matter. Whether that be humorous or subversive or fully serious, the reader will be building those expectations based on the tone that you set, and if you deviate from those expectations, you're breaking a promise to the reader. You're presenting us with characters, setting, and the conflict, and you're also giving us the tone in which those things will be dealt with. Tone is really about foreshadowing. It's telling us the general way that we can expect the story to be resolved. So how can you make sure you're setting the right tone? This is a difficult thing to give advice on because tone is very nebulous and ephemeral. There aren't really hard and fast rules about how to set it and how to get it across to the reader. Add in the fact that different people can interpret tone in different ways, and this just gets really hard. That being said, there are a few general tips that will help you along the way. Tone is set early in the story, so your opening scenes are crucial. These are what will tell the reader if they're in for a wacky comedy or a solemn, brooding think piece. This is why prologues are very popular in certain genres, because they allow you to set the tone early on in the story. Even if the main arc of the narrative starts in a very boring, not very exciting location, you can have an exciting, action-filled prologue that also sets the tone for the broader story. Because tone is essentially the attitude that you're conveying information to the reader in, how you write your viewpoints is going to have a major effect on your tone. I would argue if you're using a first-person perspective, it's a lot easier to do this, as you can more easily get opinions that the character has across to the reader, and these opinions will affect your tone. But you can also do this if you're writing in a third limited. Also, I suppose if you're writing in third-person omniscient, you can do something similar because you have that kind of present, all-seeing, all-knowing narrator. And lastly, the perennial advice of having somebody review what you've done and seeing what they think of it also applies here. Having someone, whether it's a beta reader or a critique partner, review what you've done and give you some notes about the tone that they feel it's setting can be really helpful. Ultimately, it's the only way to know if you're setting the right tone or the tone that you want to set. Ask them about their predictions for where they feel the story is going. See if the humor, if there is humor in the story, is landing the way you would like it to. And just generally make sure that their reactions to what you're writing is the reaction that you wanted them to have. Just like I'm hoping you'll react well to this video being over, because it is. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.